Hi guys. So I don't know if you remember, but we left off where Heather and Molly just flew down through the floor in the cabin. So we're going to find out what happened. Tangled together, Heather and I landed on the dirt floor. For a few seconds, neither of us moved nor spoke, too shocked to understand what had happened. Finally, I opened my eyes and looked up. Above my head was the hole we had fallen through, its edges ragged. A gray light shone down through it, but all around us was darkness, smelling of mold and damp earth and age. Shivering, I turned to Heather. "Are you all right?" "Helen put us here," Heather whispered. "She hates me now because of you and what you did." She crouched beside me, trembling with fear and cold. Uneasily, I gazed upward at the hole, expecting to see Helen peering down at us, laughing. Nothing was there. "Why didn't you let me go with her?" Helen sobbed. "It sounded so beautiful. Rainbows every day, unicorns eating roses, mermaids singing, nothing ugly or hateful." Heather began sobbing again, and I put my arm around her, trying to comfort her. She immediately stiffened and pulled away from me. "Don't touch me," she wept. "Get away from me. I don't want you near me." "I didn't know you were so unhappy," I said, thinking how well she had hidden her misery behind hateful looks and nasty acts. I pulled her back against me, shocked at how small and bony she was. "Like me or not," I said, holding her tightly, "we have to stay close to each other for warmth. People can die in this kind of cold." "I don't care if I die," Heather sobbed. "In fact, I hope I do. And then I could be with Helen again and go to her kingdom and be happy." "But remember, Heather, she told you your father wouldn't be there. You might hate Michael and me and even Mom, but you don't hate him. You love him." "But what she said is true. If he knew how bad I am, he wouldn't love me anymore." "Why do you think you're so bad, Heather?" I peered at her small white face, yearning to read the thoughts hidden behind the mask she wore. "What did you do?" "I can't tell. I can't tell ever. Only Helen understands." She struggled again to break away from me, but when I tightened my grip, she gave up and slumped against my side, her face hidden. "It has something to do with the fire, doesn't it?" I stared at the dark, wet tangles of hair snaking over her shoulders. "You and Helen, both of your mothers died in a fire." "Don't talk about the fire." Heather's head came up and her eyes met mine, searching, pleading. "You started the fire." I sucked in my breath, realizing I must have suspected it all along. "And so did she. That's it, isn't it?" "No, no, Molly, don't say it, don't say it." Heather pulled a cold hand over my mouth, trying to silence me, but it was too late. We clung to each other in the dark. "I didn't mean to," Heather sobbed. "I was only little. I didn't know about the stove. I thought I could hide. I thought the fire would go away. But it got bigger and bigger, and Mommy was looking for me, calling me, and I didn't answer because I thought she was going to spank me. Then I didn't hear her anymore, and there was smoke everywhere. A fireman came and he picked me up and carried me away, but Mommy wasn't anywhere. She wasn't anywhere, and it was all my fault, Molly." Heather clung to me, weeping. "Don't tell Daddy, Molly. Please don't tell Daddy. Don't tell him it was me who made Mommy die. He'll hate me. He'll hate me." "Oh, Heather, Heather." Cradling her in my arms, I rocked her as if she were a baby. My own tears splashed down on her dark head. "It wasn't your fault, Heather. You were only 3 years old. Your father would never hate you, never. You didn't mean for it to happen." But she didn't say anything. She kept crying as if she would never stop. As I hugged her, I wished that I had been kinder, more understanding, instead of resenting her so much. But how could I have known she was guarding such an awful secret? After she cried herself to sleep, I sat still, wondering what we were going to do. It was dark now. The thunder and lightning faded away like a retreating army, leaving behind a rear guard of rain. Our clothes were beginning to dry, but we were still damp and cold. I could feel Heather shivering in her sleep. Overhead, the ruins creaked and groaned as the wind prowled through the rooms and crept through the holes in the walls. Uneasily, I remembered the stones falling from the walls during Michael's and my last visit. Heather had been so sure Helen was responsible for what happened then. And now, had Helen really cast us down into this place, trapped us here for some awful purpose? Heather stirred and moaned in her sleep, and I held her tighter, determined to comfort her. "It's all right, Heather," I whispered. "I want Daddy." She opened her eyes and looked up at me. "Why hasn't he come to get us?" "Maybe he and Mom are still in Baltimore." "But it's dark, Molly." She frowned at me. "He loves Jean more than me. He doesn't care what happens to me anymore." "You know that's not true." "She took him away from me." Heather's voice was small and cold. She sat up and wiggled out of my embrace. Not wanting her to slip back into that way of thinking, I shook my head. Look, Heather, don't you think Michael and I feel the same way sometimes? We were perfectly happy living with Mom after our father left. We didn't want to share her with Dave and you, but she loves him, and he loves her. They love us too. Maybe we just have to learn to be a family, all of us. You and Michael and me and Mom and Dave. She shook her head, unconvinced. Daddy and I were a family, just the two of us, and Grandmother. Well, Michael and Mom and me were a family too. But now, we're a bigger family. But not better. She stuck out her lip, pouting. But we will get better, starting with you and me, Heather. I reached out and grasped her hand. I'll be your sister, Heather, if you'll be my sister. She regarded me somberly, examining my face for signs of deception. And you won't tell Daddy about the fire? No, I won't tell him. I paused, squeezing her hand tighter. But I think you should. No, Molly. Heather jerked her hand away. No, don't make me do that. I can't. But if you tell him, you'll know he loves you. I stood up and followed her as she backed away from me. No, she moaned. No. Come back here, Heather. I reached for her and missed as she slipped away from me, still crying. I'm not going to make you do anything you don't want to do. All I'm saying is, but I didn't get a chance to finish my sentence. As I lunged toward her, eager to explain, I stumbled and nearly fell. What is this? I picked up a round object from the heap of the rubble. When I realized what sort of eyes I was staring into, I recoiled in horror and hurled the thing into the darkness. I heard it clatter against something unseen and pulled Heather close to me, feeling her body tremble against mine. What was it, Molly? She whispered. A skull, I gasped. It was a human skull. I saw its eyes. Heather pressed her knuckles into her mouth and stared fearfully into the shadows where I'd thrown the skull. It's them, she cried. It's them. Whoo! I clung to her, terrified, imagining we were buried alive in this hideous family crypt, surrounded by the bones of Helen's victims. Helen's mother and her father, they were trapped in the house in the fire, and nobody found their bodies. Heather's voice was shaking too. The two of us edged back to the middle of the tiny room. A little light still shone through the hole over our heads, making the shadows around us seem darker and more menacing. What other hideous thing lurked there, waiting for us? For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the dripping of the rain and the cheep, cheep, cheep of the cricket. The small, cheerful noises seemed very out of place in our grim surroundings. Heather, I said, breaking the silence at last, did Helen start the fire? She nodded. She didn't mean to. She was arguing with her stepfather, and she knocked an oil lamp over. The tablecloth and the drapes caught fire, and Helen ran out of the room. The fire spread so fast, it trapped her mother and stepfather. Helen heard her mother calling her, and then the floor caved in. She ran outside into the pond. Heather hid her face in her hands and wept. She's been alone ever since, Molly. But the other little girls, the ones who drowned in the pond? I leaned towards Heather. What happened to them? Why weren't they with her? They wouldn't stay. They always faded away and left her. She doesn't know where they went. To their parents, maybe. They didn't love her enough to stay. Heather leaned against me, sobbing. And now I've left her too, and she's still alone. I stroked her hair and tried to comfort her, wishing Mom were here. Surely she and Dave had returned from Baltimore and noticed that we were missing. Why hadn't they come to rescue us? I'm so cold, Heather whimpered, so cold. The temperature seemed to be plummeting, and the air smelled more strongly of decay and stagnation. A glimmer of light drew my attention to the hole above us. Helen was kneeling on the floor, peering down at us. The silver chain hung from her neck, the heart slowly turning, reflecting the bluish glow of her skin. It was my fault, Helen cried, stretching out her hand. My fault, Mama. Heather looked up and then shrank against me, her bony shoulder blades jabbing against my chest. I don't want to go with her anymore, Molly, she whispered. Don't let her take me. I held her tight. Don't worry, I whispered. I'll protect you. Mama, I'm sorry, Helen wailed above us. She looked more tragic than frightening, and I ached with pity for her. She seemed unaware of Heather and me. All that existed for her was her own sorrow. Slowly, she dropped down through the hole and glided past us into the shadows where I hurled the skull. Dropping to her knees, she whispered, Forgive me, Mama, forgive me. She paused. In the glow she cast, I could see two skeletons. Extending her hand, she reached out toward them. And you too, Papa Robert. I didn't mean for you to die, nor Mama neither. Nor me. She knelt motionless by the skeletons, head bowed, weeping. Heather's hand closed around mine. Poor Helen, she whispered. As I watched, another figure appeared in the cellar. From a mist, it seemed to form itself into a woman wearing a long dress. Smiling, she drew Helen into her feet and embraced her, comforting her, stroking her hair, rocking her gently. For several seconds, the two figures shimmered in the darkness. Then they disappeared as quickly as the images on a screen vanish when the projector is turned off. Slowly, the terrible cold subsided, and I knew that Heather and I were alone and out of danger. It was Helen's mother, I whispered. Heather squeezed my hand. She forgave her, Molly. She forgave her. She looked up at me and smiled. She knew it was an accident. She knew Helen didn't mean for them to die. I know. I returned the squeeze, marveling at the tiny bones in her hand. Helen isn't alone anymore. She isn't sad. Heather gazed at me. Do you think my mother has forgiven me? Oh, Heather, she forgave you long ago. And Daddy, if I tell him, do you think he'll forgive me? I'm sure he will. Heather relaxed and leaned against me, her thumb seeking her mouth. I wish he would come and get us, she sighed. I want to go home. So do I. I toyed with her hair, twirling it around my finger. It was dry now, silky soft against my skin. Tonight, I thought, when we were safely home, I would brush it for her until it shone. And that's where we're going to pause. We're so close to finishing. See you guys soon. Bye.